So let's take a look at some of the other tools that we can use when we're creating a hard surface model. I'm going to turn my perspective off so we're looking straight down an orthographic side view. I'm going to go to B for brush, C for clip, and I'm going to select the clip circle brush. Now this is going to tell me that it will become the active selection brush. So when I press Control Shift, it will replace what was the visibility marquee. So now I'm going to get this circle like this. Now, the way this brush works is, if I press Control Shift, click and drag, it creates a circle. If I press the space bar, I can move the circle around. Now, I want to avoid putting the crosshair over the model, so I'm going to leave the crosshair outside the mesh, and then let go, and it cuts away, or clips away, everything but what was inside that circle. If we undo that, and then repeat that, draw our circle. Now this time I'm going to press the Alt key, and you see it shades that circle. When I let go, it clips away what's inside that circle. So it's revealing that under section there. So this is a way that we can sort of clip out areas of the model to add some more complex surfaces. So if I go to B for brush, C for clip, there's some other clip brushes here. I have the clip circle center. I'm going to skip that node so it doesn't pop up every time I select one of those brushes. Now this creates a perfect circle. You see if I hold down the Alt key, it clips out. Now what happens if I let that circle crosshair intersect with the mesh? This is actually quite interesting. If I hold down the Alt key, what this will do is it creates a sort of cylindrical countersunk form there. Now that might be something that you want to do for maybe a point of attachment or a little bit of detailing, like maybe I want to put something like that right here. Hold down the Alt key and zoom in. Now you see we get this sort of countersunk circle. Now the quality of that is only going to be as good as your resolution. So you see we're getting a little bit of faceting there. So if I undo that, and then if I were to add a subdivision level, so now we're at 3 million polygons, and I will repeat that same stroke, hold down the Alt key. Now you see we get a bit of a better result there. I'll undo that. Now I'm going to change in the light box. I'm going to go to the tool menu here, and I'm going to open up a polysphere because I want to sort of illustrate what this is doing. Because there's two ways that you can clip geometry in ZBrush. You can use the clip brushes and you can use the trim brushes. You can also use a slice brush, and that doesn't actually remove geometry, it just slices it. So let's take a look at what these do. I have a polysphere here, and I'm going to store a morph target by going to Morph Target, Store Morph Target. Now all that does is it stores a copy of the mesh in memory, so I can switch back and forth between my altered mesh and my stored morph target. So let's store the morph target. I will go to B for brush, C for clip, and I will select the clip curve brush this time. Control Shift, click and drag, and that creates this line, this curve, and there's a feathered edge on one side and a dotted line on the other. Everything on the feathered edge side will be clipped away. So if I draw this line like this, you see it's clipped that plane. If I draw that curve again, but this time I tap the Alt key once, I can put a sort of a stop there and start to create a curve. If I double click or double tap the Alt key, I can make a hard angle. Double tap the Alt key again, and then tap it once, I can create a compound form like that. Now this works fine until we start to clip back around where the object starts to curve back. Watch what happens. If I press the space bar, I can move my clip curve. If I clip beyond the undercut where the surface starts to curve back, look what happens. We get this sort of winged edge there. What's happening is the clip brushes, clip curve, clip rectangle, clip circle, they don't actually cut geometry away. If I take this morph slider and morph back to my original shape, you see all it's doing, it's flattening everything on the other side of that curve down to that plane. That's what this brush actually does. Now the benefit of this is that it can actually create these really nice compound shapes like this. This compound curve, that's easier to create with a clip curve brush. If I go to B for brush, T for trim, and select the trim curve or trim lasso or trim rectangle, this brush, if I press Control Alt, click and drag, looks the same, but what this does is it physically removes the geometry. So let's undo that. B for brush, T for trim, trim curve. There we go. Now you see, when I try and use this brush, it tells me that I cannot use it with multiple subdivision levels. That's a difference between the trim brushes and the clip brushes. So I need to go to geometry, delete my lower levels, and now I'll run that brush again. You see, we no longer get that winged edge. We also get a polygroup for the area that's been clipped. You'll also see that this is all quads, but the new geometry, they're triangles. It's actually cut an edge there and filled it with new geometry. So I'm going to undo that. And you see this compound curve that we created here. We'll do the same thing using the trim curve brush. Control Shift, click and drag. I'll tap the Alt key so I can start to create a curve. Double tap the Alt key for a hard angle. Double tap again, and then we'll create another curve here. Now you see what it's done there. It's actually filled that hole, but we don't get the same crisp quality to our edge. We'd have to go back with the clip curve brush and then repeat that, just trace back along that. So we'll just trim it down just a little bit closer. Like this. And then that will clean that up. And of course, we have a little bit of stretching there, and that's just down to where I placed that curve. So if I did this again, tap Alt, double tap Alt, double tap Alt, tap Alt, we'll get something like that. So then we can replicate that same sort of sharp edging, but we can have it past the point of the curvature. So that's important to understand when it comes to the clip brushes versus the trim brushes. Now there's also a brush called Slice. If I go to B for brush, S for Slice, these are in alphabetical order, so you'll find it right here. There's Slice Curve, Slice Circle, and Slice Rectangle. Slice Curve behaves just like the other curve brushes. Control Shift, click and drag. It gives me this line. When I let go, it doesn't appear that anything happens, but if I go into frame mode, you see it's actually cut a line in the geometry there. So it's actually sliced that out. Now this can be really handy when you're trying to part out pieces for 3D printing. So I can isolate that polygroup. Now that's not a separate object. It's still the same subtool. It just has a new polygroup and new geometry cut for that group. I can also double tap the Alt key and create a hard angle like I did for the others, or single tap to create a curve. So this can be really handy if you want to split something apart. If I were to go now to my subtool menu, go to Split, and click Group Split, and click OK, it would split each one of those into its own subtool. So if I isolate this subtool here, turn on Solo, you see that is a shell. So I would need to hole fill that to get a solid object. So I'd have to go to my geometry, modify topology, and say close holes. And that would close those holes. But you see, it's not going to give me the perfect kind of shape that I would get otherwise. You can get the perfect negative impression of that if you were to use the clip brushes and then use booleans to create a negative impression. There's various ways that you can do that, but the important thing to note is that when you use the slice brush like this, it's just cutting geometry and polygrouping. It's not slicing anything and separating it, and it is not hole filling. So let's go back to our helmet. Let's turn off frame mode, and let's add some more interest to this. So let's go back into frame mode and take a look at our polygrouping. So everything's got pretty organized polygroups. At this stage, I'm going to build up some of these shapes a little bit more and start to cut in some secondary planes to them. So I think it would be nice to take the clay tubes brush here, turn off our alpha, turn our focal shift down a little bit, and turn off frame mode. Now we're at 3 million polygons, so we should have a decent amount of geometry to work with here. And I'm going to isolate this polygroup, and I just want to build this shape up right here. And I'm going to take my trim dynamic brush and start to plane down some of these shapes here. Let's plane this back. Let this be a compound sort of curve coming up into here. and I'll use my B for brush, H for hard polish. Grab my hard polish brush here. And let's hard polish this area. You see, as I come around this portion here, I can get a nice little sharp angle right there. And let's let this sort of bevel come up into this surface here, and then we'll just polish this side down and this side. We can add a bevel along the edge here just by polishing right along that corner. Turn my draw size up, and then I can just bevel that, or plane that all down if I like. Let's take our hard polish and do a little bit of polishing on this side here, maybe a little bit of polishing here. Let's go back to B for brush, P for polish, and just use the standard polish brush. We'll do that same brush right here. I'm going to turn my Z intensity up a little bit so it's a stronger brush. And watch what happens here. If we polish along this area, you see we can start to sketch in these sort of plane changes. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and just smooth out any sort of nuance there. Now, let's get that tied in there. So, do the same thing on this side and just sort of chase that plane change right here. B for brush, P for pinch, I is the hotkey for the pinch brush, and I'm just going to pinch that edge right there. Hold down the Alt key, turn my draw size down, hold down the Alt key, and I'm just going to pinch this edge here and replay my stroke a few times. And then I'll just smooth that transition so I don't have any sort of nicks in the surface there. We'll do the same thing here. Let's pinch this, and then Alt-1. That's my personal hotkey that I set, by the way. You'll have to set your own hotkey, and you'll do that by going to the stroke menu, go to modifiers, and then just Control-Alt-Click on Replay Last, and it will ask you to assign a custom hotkey. So let me go back to my Trim Dynamic brush, and we'll just do a little bit of trimming here, and then Reveal All. Now, as I've been doing this, I have not had symmetry turned on. So you see this side is asymmetrical now. So this is pretty neat. I want to show you how you can reintroduce your symmetry on something like this that has no subdivision levels. I'm going to turn my floor plane on. Now there's an XYZ button inside the floor plane button. If I turn on X and turn off Y, I get the X plane here. Go to the draw menu, bring my elevation slider down to 0. So sometimes it's easier just to type in 0. That sets it right at world center. Now I'll go to Geometry under the Tool menu, go to Tool, Geometry, and there is an option here called Mirror and Weld right there, and it defaults to the X-axis. Now I've got 3 subdivision levels. If I click that, it tells me that I cannot do this with multiple subdivision levels, so I need to delete my lower levels and then Mirror and Weld. And what that's going to do, it's going to mirror what's on this side over here and then weld it together. See what that did? Now, obviously, that's not the side that I want to keep. I want to keep the side that I've changed. So all I need to do is go to the Deformation menu, mirror the mesh, so this side is flipped over here, so you see like that. Then I will go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld across the X-axis, and then that will duplicate that across. If I go into Frame mode and zoom in, it might be a little hard to see, but it's actually created a perfect line right down the center. So there's no problem with that, and it's also maintained my poly grouping. So if you do find yourself in a situation like that where your X symmetry has been turned off, it's not the end of the world. I think that's one of the number one sort of early problems people have in ZBrush as they're learning the program and starting to work with it is they lose their symmetry and they're not sure how to get it back. But luckily, it's not nearly as difficult as it used to be. There's a lot of tools in ZBrush now that we didn't have back in the day, as they say, for restoring your symmetry. So it's very, very rare that you would ever have a situation where you could not restore your symmetry. So here I've isolated this poly group, and I'm just going to, my brush is too big. I'm going to undo my brush size there. And I'm just going to go back to my pinch brush, And I'm not using any sort of lazy mouse or anything on this. I'm just freehand pinching this. I'm going to replay that a few times, hold down the Alt key, replay that a few times, and just smooth that, and then reveal all again. There we go. So let's start to add some compound shapes to this to make this a little bit more interesting. I'm going to go to the light box, go to my brushes. Let's go back to the planer brushes, and let's grab the planer cut thin. Just double click on that. And now we can start to sort of carve out some sub planes, as it were. So I'm going to turn off frame mode, and let's see what happens if we were to isolate this polygroup. Let's mask all of this, invert our masking, and that's going to protect this area from any impact from this brush. Now I've got a little bit of extra here that I don't know that I want, so I'm going to mask this as well just by control clicking on the background, and sometimes it can be a little bit hard to spot. So just to be sure, I'm going to hide this polygroup and this polygroup, mask everything, and then reveal all again. There we go. That's the area that I want to actually impact. So if I take my planer cut thin brush, I can start to create, as I showed you earlier, these sort of islands, these subsections of detail. If I turn my draw size down and work from here, you see that we're starting to create these really neat compound shapes here. If I drag this through here, I can create these sort of panel lines. And this sort of stuff is actually quite challenging to model under, normal circumstances in Maya. And it's, again, what makes ZBrush Hard Surface so very special is that you are able to do this sort of thing using a sketched-based approach, where you'd really have to have things planned out, unless you're an exceptional hard surface modeler. And I've been very lucky to know a lot of really good hard surface modelers. They can sketch hard surface. They can work out things on the fly. But that's not everybody. And so having a brush-based, sketched-based approach to this sort of modeling is really nice. That's a little too many planes there. I'm going to undo that and undo that. Now, another thing that might be handy at this point is to break this out into different panels. So you see that this is still giving me some jaggies along the edge there. Well, my 3 million polygons are for the whole helmet, so this is not as dense as it could be. I know that this piece is going to be separated. So what I can do is, if I go into frame mode, I'm going to turn off the lines on polyframe, so all I see is my colors. So if I Control-Shift-Click and isolate that polygroup there, let's zoom in and take a look at what we have in the thickness here. So you see that we've got these thickness areas. Let's turn the line back on so you can see. So I could probably expand this out and get a little bit of that thickness in there. So I'm going to go to Visibility, and I'm going to shrink. Now, as I shrink my visibility, because we used panel loops, it's going to just naturally start hiding those edge loops. So basically, I am sort of adding to what's hidden right now. And what's hidden, I'm going to split out into a separate object. So let's go ahead and... Now, it can be easy to kind of lose your bearings here. So you want to make sure that you rotate around and you're clear on where you are in the thickness in the shell. So I'm going to go ahead and keep shrinking visibility. I just want to get down into the depths of that, that panel, like that. Now, I am going to save my work. I'm going to turn off frame mode. And I'm going to go ahead and take this opportunity to save my work. Now, I have that section hidden. If I go to my Subtool menu, under Subtool, I have a menu for Split. Under Split, I can split hidden. So if I click Split Hidden, it will take the hidden geometry and then split that out as a new tool. It also maintains its polygrouping. So let's turn off Solo. So now this housing is separated from this subtool, which is the visor this top portion and these side panels and this back panel. So let's solo this, go into frame mode and take a look at what we've got. Let's turn the lines off so it's a bit easier to see now. So at this stage, you might notice that there's an inner shell. When we created our panel loops, we did just check the option to make it double-sided. So there is a thickness to these pieces, and that's actually really useful. That inner shell can be used for a variety of things. If I were to hide the outer shell, it would be nice to have that inner shell there. I could flip the normals on it and make that into a separate piece. But I just wanted to point out that you're seeing that there. Were I to go to Tool, Display Properties, and turn on double-sided, then I could see the inner shell as a whole like that. So if I were to isolate the inner shell like this, now I'm still using my slice curve there, so I'm going to go to B for brush. I'm going to do B for brush, S for select, and R for rectangles. That takes us out of that selection brush, or that slice brush. There is my inner shell. I could take that inner shell with everything else hidden, go to Subtool, Split Hidden. Now I'm going to rename this inner shell. So now I've got a subtool called inner shell. I've got the housing that we were just looking at and the sort of interim pieces, the housing that sits in between the panels. So let's turn off solo. I'm going to alt-click on these panels. Now I want to split these out. So I don't want to polygroup them and lose my individual polygroups that I have for the thickness and the panel lines. So what I'll do is I'll go to B for brush, S for select, L for lasso. And I am going to isolate pieces one at a time using the lasso. And then I will just click split, split hidden. There we go. Let's go back to this piece here. I will isolate this piece, split hidden. I'll isolate these pieces here. This is going to select both pieces on both sides, and I'm okay with those being a single subtool for right now, so I'll click Split Hidden, and then move down. Now we've got the visor and the bottom portion of the helmet, so let's select the visor, and then Split Hidden. Now I will turn off solo. Now let's do a little bit of work on the visor. Let's see what we can do here. So let's turn on visibility on other parts. Now with the visor, because I've got these polygroups, I could isolate just the surface of the visor. Now because I'm on the select lasso, it's going to try and select edge loops. So I'll go to B for brush, S for select, R for rectangle, and then that makes it much more straightforward. My control shift clicking. I can mask that front face, invert my mask, and let's turn our frame mode back on and take a look at what we've got here. And I could really benefit from having a few more edge loops here in my selection. So I'm going to isolate this group, go down to visibility, grow, and let's just grow that a few times, mask that, invert the mask. Now let's see what we can get if we want to sort of expand this visor out. Let's turn off frame mode. Probably the easiest way to do something like that is sort of a global deformation. We could use something like spherize. If I turn spherize up, that can sort of spherize that form. See what that's doing is creating a spherical shape based on that. If I take the transpose gizmo, click the unmasked mesh center, I can then pull that forward, and that gives us this nice sort of bulging look to the visor here. So we can try that again. We can go back to spherize and we can spherize it again. See what that's doing is it's basically giving it it's conforming it around a spherical shape. Like that. So if I bring that forward and I can rotate that back, countersink that a bit. I could even play around with scaling it, adjusting the sizing of it. Move it down, rotate it, bring it forward. So there's a lot of different things that we could do using that to bulge out that sort of heat shield or that forward visor. I'm going to undo back before the spherizing. There we go. And we'll center this pivot again by going to Unmasked Mesh Center. We could also just use inflate. Because we've masked everything that we don't want to be changed, we could inflate it like this, and then we could use our polish by features to polish that surface. Now, that didn't work very well because we have the other option turned on. So let's swap our option and then polish by features, and you can see the effect that this gives us, which isn't really as nice as the spherize. So undo that. Now, other things that we could do, we could just directly inflate with the inflate brush, make sure that our X symmetry is turned on, and I could just inflate this using the inflate brush, smooth using smooth, and then polish by features to sort of clean up any edges there. Once again, we could expand this out and then polish by features like this. And that could give us sort of a nice bulging forward look, like a lens bulge to that visor. But that's not something that I really like. What I'm going to do, something that I really like playing with, is one of the deformers that's in the gizmo. So if I take the gizmo, turn it on by pressing the W key, turn off X symmetry, and then go to the Unmasked Mesh Center. I'm going to use Project Primitive. So I'm going to click the gear, and here I've got all these different deformers. Project Primitive will project a primitive shape. So there you see, right there, it's projecting a sphere. If I change my scaling here, I'm changing the parameters of the primitive which is being projected. So I can scale it up globally. I could scale it down in the Z-axis. I could scale it down in the Y-axis. I could move it back in space, changing the depth of that projection. So that's quite cool. I'm liking what I get there. Now, there are these little white dots here. If I take these, I can clip my projected primitive. So you can actually completely clip it away entirely. I can clip it on one side, but I'm very happy to have this be sort of a spherical form like this. Now, I can move this down in space. I can scale this up. You can see the effect that this gives us. So let's squash this down. We can also rotate it like this, and that's going to give us a bit of a better effect. I'm going to really push this out so you can see what's happening here. If I change my scaling, it's literally like the geometry is being shrink wrapped around a primitive shape. So I'll just dial that back a little bit. And there we go. So that's a cool kind of helmet. I'm going to scale that up in Y. And you see that projection creates this little lip around the edge that's actually a nice little detail, which I'll keep. Now, if I'm happy with that, all I need to do is click the gear icon and click Accept. And now that has been projected as a primitive shape onto the visor. If I undo it, I can make it go away entirely. Go back to the gizmo, go to Project Primitive, and I've got my parameters again. So if I change my mind, I can come in here and say, I need to scale that in X a little bit. There we go. And maybe I need to pull this forward a little bit. Press the Q key that leaves the transpose line so you can actually, or the transpose gizmo. So I can move around this now and really see what I'm getting. It makes it a bit easier to sort of spot what's happening. So if I'm happy with that, then I will press the W key twice, get the gear, and then click Accept. So I'm going to save my work again. Save often. It's a great habit to get into, and always save iteratively. Save your files with a 001, 002, 003. It's a great habit, and you can always go back and delete earlier versions if you don't need them anymore. But the worst thing, and this will happen in any program, is if you start corrupting a file by saving on top of it over and over again, then you'll lose all your work. Now, ZBrush is doing that autosave. You know, even if I don't press the number 9 hotkey, it's going to quick save for me. The quick save button is right there, by the way. But like I said, you don't want to rely on quick save. Quick save is like an emergency option. So I think that visor is pretty cool. Let's start putting some materials on this so we can get a sense of character as we work on it. So let's solo this subtool, Control Shift click, make sure everything's visible and clear any masking. So there we go. Let's make sure we've got a little thickness bit here that's a little stray bit of geometry that I probably don't need. So we could isolate that and delete it just by hiding it and going to Geometry, Modify Topology, and then Delete Hidden. So Modify Topology, Delete Hidden, but I'm going to keep it just in case I decide that I want to use it for something. So I'm sort of, playing around with the tools as we're going and seeing what we come up with. So I might use that later for another bit of detail. So I want to put an interesting sort of surface material on here. So perhaps it's a heat shield, it's a sun shield or something. Maybe I'll put a droplet material on here, which is kind of a chrome, a nice cool metallic shader, cool as in color temperature. So I'll select material, go to color, fill object, and that fills that with that material. Now, if you want to render this transparent, that is absolutely possible inside of ZBrush, and we talk about that in the chapter specifically on materials and rendering. So be sure that you watch that, because I walk you through creating an eye that has a translucent cornea or transparent cornea. So we are able to render objects in ZBrush transparent. So we'll turn solo off, and then let's change back to our basic material too. So we've got a little visor here. Maybe I find that too overbearing. I could also change to Matcap Gorilla, which is a nice sort of black shader. It's a nice matte black. So I'll make sure material is selected and go to color, fill object. Now if I change to basic material too, we have that nice black matte material on the visor. So let's start to create some more details on here. We'll go back up to this top piece where we were going to use the planar cut thin. So this is now a separated object. So now we're only at 224,000 faces, or 224. That's the geometry we were working with earlier when we were getting the sort of nasty edges on what we were working on. So now we can actually divide this. Press Control D to divide this a few times. So now we're at 3 million polygons. So now we can go in here and actually use the planar cut brush again. So I'll go to B for brush, and it should still be here in my most recently selected brushes. There's planar cut thin. Now we're going to get a much sharper, cleaner edge. Do you see that? So let's go to the sides here. We'll turn our draw size down, and then we'll just, let me undo. I would prefer it to be here. We'll do a little panel that runs right through here. And you see, just for free, we can start to build up these really cool kind of shapes. There we go. Let's come around here to the back. I'm going to shift snap to a back view, and I'll do the same thing. Let's just run planar cut thin here. Let's turn our brush size up, and let's run planar cut thin here. So that's pretty neat. I like that compound form that's created. If I don't want something quite so complex, I can maybe come to the side here. Don't underestimate how nice it is to have areas where there isn't a lot of stuff happening next to areas of high detail. That's kind of a nice thing to keep in mind as you're working on anything, be that hard surface or costume or creature. It's areas of rest. So I'm quite happy with this shape here. So let's go ahead and save our work. So I'm going to Alt-click on these side panels to select these, and let's start to break these up into more aggregate parts. I think it would be cool to put a little countersunk cylindrical form here. I think that would feel pretty neat. So I'm going to go to B for brush, C for clip, and go to my clip circle center because I want it to be a perfect circle. Control Shift, click drag, and then I'm going to let them go from about this angle here. So that has now created this really cool sort of countersunk shape there. I want to be careful that those don't read like little ears sticking out from the side of the head, but I think it should be okay. I'm going to do another one here. Control Shift. Now, this is only 182,000 faces right now, this particular subtool, because we've broken this up. It's a lot easier to work with right now. So let's break this down further. Let's go ahead and do another clip here. So let's see, let's bring this to this angle. I want to look straight down the angle that I want to clip. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key And it's not quite giving me what I want. Let's see what happens if we do it here. No, that's definitely not what I want. So let me solo this. There we go. And this time, oops, this time I'm going to move that crosshair over, press the Alt key. There we go. So what's happening is it's just giving me the circle, but it's sort of pushing it in the wrong direction. I am kind of curious what would happen, though, if we carve out a negative space here, though. So I'm going to move this crosshair out and hold down the Alt key. And there we start to run into limitations in our polygroups, and also that we're using a clip brush. So I'm going to go to B for brush, T for trim. And let's do trim circle. Control Shift. Now, if I want to replicate that same behavior, by the way, where it's square and from the center, just go to my stroke. This is the trim circle brush using the circle stroke, but if I turn on square and center, it will replicate that same behavior of a perfect circle. So we can do something like this, and that's interesting, but not really what I'm looking for. Let me see if I can't do something here. Oops. Control Shift click drag, hold down the Alt key. Let's see what happens if we pull something back from here. I'm accidentally hitting the Control key. That's why I keep getting the show hide marquee. Hey, that's cool. That's interesting. So a lot of this is exploratory. You know, as you're developing shapes, like I said, it's a sketched based process. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to do this from here, and I want right now what I'm doing is I'm looking at. Let's move this over here. I'm looking at this curve, and I'm going to try and let that curve flow into this panel line here. So just like when you're designing sort of anatomy or a creature, or even any type of composition, you're looking for unified lines of flow, sort of leading lines through the design. And that will help unify these parts together and make it feel like it was made, make it feel like it has structure and purpose. So that's kind of a neat detail there, and now you start to see that we're revealing that inner shell that we created when we duplicated our model at the beginning. So this inner shell is going to be a nice thing to have, and we can put some interesting textures on that as well to help add even more interest to our design. So let's go ahead and I'm going to go back to my brush menu, and I'm going to go to the planar cut thin. I still have that brush selected. And I'm going to go to B for brush, S for select, and just make sure that I no longer have the trim curve brush selected so I don't accidentally trim something when I'm trying to show or hide it. I want to see what we get if we do a little bit of a panel line here. No, I don't like that. Let's bring this down to here. So I want to see if it's beneficial to create some couple of interesting sort of panel lines here. So if I'm not getting what I want using the planar cut thin brush, what I'll do is I'll put them in manually. So I'm going to undo that, and I'm going to solo these pieces. So let's go back to the Dam Standard brush this time. Now, the Dam Standard brush is great for carving in panel lines. We're only at 185,000 faces, so let's divide this a couple times. So we're at 3 million. So if I go back to my planar cut thin with more geometry, I might be able to get a better result from this, but I'd rather actually show you how we can create this sort of thing manually. So I could use my planar cut thin brush to create a nice little line like that. But watch this. If I go to my Dam Standard brush, take my Dam Standard brush, and let's say I'm going to undo that panel line there. Let's say I want to create a panel line that runs from here down. So if I click with my mouse, left mouse button click, or touch down with my tablet pen, then press Shift and move my brush, I get this red line. Now this red line will give me a readout. This readout is the angle. So I'm just going to drag it to about here and then let go. And what this should do is give us, there we go, a perfectly straight line. Now it's too big, so let's undo that, and let's turn our draw size down quite low. And now let's do that again, because we're at 3 million polys. We should be able to actually handle a pretty nice sized panel line. There you go. Look at that nice crisp panel line there. Let's do another one. Let's say we want our panel line to go from here. Oops. Don't forget to click, press shift, drag, then let go of shift, and it will carve the panel line. So let's do another one here, maybe like this. And because I've got symmetry turned on, it is carving those lines on both sides. So let's come over here, maybe, and I want to make sure that I'm looking at everything else before I put the rest of these lines in, because I want them to sort of make sense with the rest of the figure. Let's make sure that we can actually see where we're going here. So I'm going to click, hold shift, drag up to here, let go, and that gives me a nice panel line. And once again, I'll click, press shift, drag down to here, let go. And that one didn't quite catch because the angle on screen. So what I'll do is I'll just do it again. And that's not giving me what I want. So let me go ahead and undo, go into frame mode. I see what's happening here is we have this area is not divided. So what happened here is at some point we divided while we had a mask. So I'm going to undo back and see if I can't get to that point. And there it is right there. So I make sure that I don't have any masking on. Divide a couple times. Yep. So basically, when I created this plane here, what happened was it stretched the geometry out. So we end up with not a lot of geo in this area. So what I would do in a situation like this, because I really want to actually be able to put more detail on here, and that's one of the reasons why my clip brush wasn't working particularly well. It's very simple. There's a few ways we could do it. The easiest way is to just dynamesh it. So if I dynamesh it, I don't have any polygroups here that I really need to hang on to, so I can just do a regular dynamesh. Just go to dynamesh. Let's solo this so we can see it very clearly. Zoom in, and I'll dynamesh with the default settings. So it's asked me if I want to keep my multiple subdivision levels, say no. And obviously that's not dense enough, so I'm going to undo that. And let's turn up our resolution and then dynamesh again, say no. And that should actually, we could go a little bit higher, but I'm not going to. So problem is though, right here, we're getting these little holes. Those are countersunk inside the head. If you do get holes like that in a dynamesh, usually you can just inflate them. And on an organic piece, it doesn't really matter quite so much. Then you dynamesh again, and it will fill those holes. These don't particularly matter because they're sitting inside the model. So I could, really go back to B for brush, T for trim, go to my trim circle brush, and I could, now that I've got some geometry to actually work with, I could trim circle out these bits here. So if I carve those away, you can see we get this cool crescent shape coming around there, which is neat. But this is one thing about the trim brush. Look at that. It doesn't always work with symmetry. Okay? So we already know the solution to this. What I will simply do is turn on my floor plane, and I will go turn off Dynamesh, go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Mirror and Weld. And then that just mirrors those two across. Now let's go back to our damn standard brush, and we can reintroduce those panel lines as we had before. So I'm going to turn the floor plane off, turn on solo, and then I'm going to click, press and hold shift and drag, and that will give me my straight line. Click, press and hold shift, drag, straight line. Do the same thing up to here and down to here. Now it gives me a nice panel line there. So let's maybe put a little line here. And that's good. I think those will be nice. So let's say I want to add some more pieces and parts. I'm going to go ahead and save my work. And And let's take a look. If we rotate around to the back, we still have this panel back here that we haven't really done anything with yet. So let's solo this, take a look at it, go into frame mode. Now, as it stands, this is pretty dense. So one thing that a lot of people neglect to realize is you can just rough something out with your hard surface brushes and panel loops and things like this, and then just remesh it. Just retopologize it with Z-Remesher, and then carry on manipulating it as you kind of would just normal hard surface models. So what we'll do is we'll go to Z-Remesher for this particular part. Now, there's a lot of polygrouping here. If we rotate around, you see we've got this bit of shell here, which is a separate piece. And we've got this bit here. As a matter of fact, I can Control-Shift-Click and hide that bit of shell. So let's see if I hide that and then turn off solo. You see what that does is that gives me a real nice view into the undershell, the under layer there, which could be quite nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to retopologize this. I'll go to Z-Remesher. Now, I want to keep the overall shape of it. So we have an entire chapter, which you may or may not have seen already, just on Z-Remesher. So you need to know, in Z-Remesher, we can detect edges and keep creases. We've got all sorts of ways to retopologize a hard surface piece to maintain its form. Something this simple, it might work just under its default settings. So it is symmetrical. I'm going to leave X symmetry turned on, and I'm going to Z-Remesh it. We'll let that process, and it should go pretty quickly because it is a relatively simple object. There we go. So problem is it's not working. It's actually trying to sort of hole fill because I've got something hidden there. So what I need to do is hide that piece. Let's go ahead and Control-Shift-Click on that, hide it, zoom in there, make sure that I'm not... See, you've got to be real careful with all these loops. There we go. So there's another loop there. Okay, now I'm going to unsolo and just make sure that I'm not missing out on anything by getting rid of those. I need to make sure that I go to Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. Now I can retopologize. So let's Z-Remesh it. Just under the default settings, like I said. We'll try it with the base settings first, and then see if we need to make any adjustments to it. So that's actually pretty good right there. I could actually reduce this more if I turn on half and Z-Remesh. I can start to half size this. Let's turn off the adaptive density and half size that again. That's taken us down to 3. Let's Z-Remesh it again. I just want to get this pretty simple because the simpler I get it, the easier it will be for me to sort of manipulate it. So let's turn off solo and see what we're getting. I'm actually okay with these starting to round off a bit here. Now I could crease my polygroup edges if I went to crease and crease polygroups, and then turn on keep creases if I want to keep those sharp edges. But I'm actually okay with these softening a little bit. I'm going to half size it again. And I think that's one too many, so I'm going to undo. Now, let's take a look at what happens if we turn on dynamic subdivisions. Let's give it a dynamic subdivision level here. See, it starts to create the look of a smoothed object here. With dynamic subdivisions on, I can use tools that require only a single subdivision level, but have a smoothed object as I'm working. For example, the Z modeler tools. So I'm going to Shift D to turn off the dynamic subdivisions, and I want to just sort of polygroup this little loop here. So I'm going to go to B for brush, Z for Z modeler, select the Z modeler brush, click OK, and I'm going to zoom in here, and I've got this poly loop here that goes all the way around. Should be this one right here. I am going to press the space. I'm going to mouse over the face, not the edge. Let's zoom in really close so you can see. I'm mousing over the face, and there's this orange line, and I'm going to let that orange line point in the direction of the poly loop that I want to polygroup. Press the space bar. I'm going to select polygroup, and I'm going to make my target poly loop All right, now if I click here, it's going to polygroup that loop. Now I could do that again on another piece, say here, and then that gives me a polygroup that runs around that loop, but I don't want that crisscrossing. I just want to get this piece here. So now I'll press the D key, and that's dynamic subdivision. Say yes. Now you can see that it gives the impression of this being a smoothed object. Now I could change my my type of quick grid. So I've got Q grid 1, 2. That gives me a nice smooth look. I can adjust my flat subdivision levels here. So let's turn up flat subdivs 1. You can see that that actually gives me the faceting. Let's turn off frame mode. So that sort of bakes the faceting in. If I take the Q grid down to 0 and my flat subdivs, you see the effect that that gives us. So let's go ahead and bring this back up to 3, no flat subdivs, and I'm going to mouse over this face. This is a polygroup island. So what I'll do is I'll mouse over this face, press the space bar, and go to Q mesh. My target is going to be polygroup island. So this is going to extrude this island out like this. See? So let's do this again. I'll do it one more time, and we can start to extrude these pieces out. So let's do another one here, like that. Maybe I want that to really come back out from the head. I'm just going to check that in terms of the silhouette. Now, if I want to sharpen areas, I can mouse over an edge like this, press the space bar, and I can crease. We'll do edge loop complete, and that will crease that whole edge loop. I can do the same thing here on this perimeter. I can crease that edge loop. Let's undo that. And I'm going to go to my smooth subdivisions and just turn up the number of smooth subdivisions here. Set Q grid down to 1. There we go. Let's crease this edge again. You see what that does there? That gives me that sort of hard edge there. Let's do the perimeter. There we go. And then I will do this perimeter here. Sometimes it's a little bit of a trick to just get that edge. There we go. So I can sharpen that edge like that. Now, if I hold down the Alt key, I can make a face selection here. So I'm just going to select a group of faces like this. Mouse over these faces, and I'm going to press the space bar. And I'm going to select Inset, not Insert, but Inset. And I'm going to select Polygroup Island, and I'm going to click Drag. And you see that insets, that creates sort of an extrusion pattern there, and it polygroups those separately. So now I can mouse over the face and go back to Q mesh, Polygroup Island, and I'll just do a little bit of an extrusion. Oops, not that much. Do a little bit of an extrusion like that, and like that, like that. So now I can get this nice little bit of hard surface detailing there, essentially for free. So if I undo that, bring this back down, I could do this in the opposite direction. I could inset that in and make a negative space like this. So let's do that one more time, and we can actually countersink that even further into the helmet. We could actually bring it all the way down so we start to expose that inner section down there. So let's turn off frame mode. There we go. So that is dynamic subdivisions right now, because the Z modeler brush won't work if you have subdivisions. So if I press Shift D, my dynamic subdivision levels go away. If I press D, it's going to ask me if I want to turn on dynamic. Just say always yes, and that turns your dynamic subdivisions on. So it's one more way that you can start to create real interesting shape variations. So let's go over here. Let's see, where are we? I'm going to do a little bit more with this portion of the helmet here. I'm still not happy with the sort of outer housing here. If I go to the transpose gizmo, go to the unmasked mesh center, I could scale this out a little bit. Maybe I want to change the proportion of it to the rest of the head. I can do that very easily just by scaling this out like so. And let's say I want to sort of scallop out a few more bits and pieces here. I am going to go to the Damn Standard brush, go to Stroke, Lazy Mouse, Backtrack, Path, or Spline, turn Track Curvature all the way up, and turn Snap to Track all the way up. And we can carve panel lines like this as we did before. But I don't think that that's what I actually want to do. I think I actually want to do some more of the trim dynamic, or the trim cut thin brush, excuse me, the planar cut thin brush. So I'm going to go to my brush here, go to planar cut thin, and let's see. I think I want to carve this bit down here. Yes, that's what I'm looking for. And I want to carve this bit down here. And I want to do the same thing here. Now this is cool. It'll give me a little bit of a continuing sort of shape here. But look, we're getting those jaggy edges. So I'm going to undo those. Check my size. We're 796,000 faces. So we can definitely benefit from some more geometry here. Let's bring it up to 3 million. And now let's put those panel lines back in. There we go. That's much more in keeping with what I want to see. So I'm going to undo that. And I tell you, I'm going to take the Clay Tubes brush, and I'm going to be a little bit more bold with this particular piece here. Go to frame mode. I'm just going to check my poly grouping. Solo this. And I kind of want to build this shape out. So let's build. Make sure I don't lose my bearings here. There we go. I'm going to build this shape out a bit more, like this. And take my Trim Dynamic brush. Oops. And there we go. We can start to really get aggressive on that form there. Let's get aggressive on this one, really carve that one back. Bring this up to here. And polish this. I say polish, but I am using the Trim Dynamic brush, but it is sort of like a very aggressive polish brush. So I'm just going to make a little plane right here. This might be a good time to change to a metallic material. It would be a lot easier to see these planes under a metallic material. There we go. We can also see the little nicks in the surface that we want to get rid of. So we'll take that, get rid of that. Let's go ahead and knock this back. And then I'm going to turn my draw size down. And I'm going to get a nice little scallop up in here. So let's plane this. I'm going to take the smooth brush, smooth some of this back a little bit, and B for brush, H for hard, and let's take the hard polish brush and just do a bit of polishing through here. There we go. That gives me this nice plane change in there. There we go. And let's get right up to that edge right there. There we go. And B for brush, P for pinch, I, stroke. Make sure our lazy mouse is turned on. And then I want to just do a pinch from here to here. And then replay that stroke a few times. Let's do that again, making sure I hold down the Alt key so it's pinching in. Just want to clean that line up. There we go. And then just run the smooth brush along it. We'll do the same thing here. Run the pinch brush along this edge. And then replay that stroke. And just run the smooth brush along it to kind of polish it up. Now we'll turn off solo. There we go. So I'm going to select this piece up here, and I want to start to put different materials on here. I'm going to select the Reflect Yellow material for this portion on the top. Go to Material, Color, Fill Object. Now I'm going to select the inner sort of intermediate portions of the helmet here. And let's make this red. So let's go ahead now and do some more work on this. I'm going to do B for brush, T for trim, D for dynamic. Do a little bit of polishing here and here. And this reflect red material is really good for showing you exactly what you're going to get on your surface. So polish some of this stuff out. Now I'm going to take my B for brush, planer cut thin. There's other planer cut brushes, by the way. If I go to my brushes here, you see there's the planer cut thin, there is the X thin, and there's also these planer lines and planer rectangle. If I were to select planer rectangle, it does a rectangular plane like that, which is basically down to whatever alpha I have selected. So if I were to select, say, the circle alpha, I can create these circular panels like this, which are quite cool as well. So if I bring this out, see it's going to plane down using that circle. So let's do a couple of these right here. You see what's happening is it gets lost in the surface. Now the reason for that is the angle that I'm drawing it on and the depth control. If I go to my brush, go to depth, it's my depth control there. So if I turn this over to the side here, get a little bit more, turn it to the completely to the side here, I get more visible. So it's sampling your first surface normal, and it's going to sometimes get lost in the mesh. Now you can adjust your embed to change where these things show up. Right now I've got X symmetry turned on. So what I would do is I bring my two dots together, turn off X symmetry, and then draw that circle here if I didn't want that to be doubled up. And then I would turn my X symmetry back on. If I turn my embed down more and then draw, you see that it's a deeper cut, but it also is visible further into the surface as I drag this out. So if I did that same draw one here, you see that stays visible. So let's alt click on this to activate this, and we'll do the same stroke here. I'll just draw that circle, and I don't like that position there, so let's draw it like this. And that's a happy accident. I like that crescent shape that it's making, so I'm gonna hang on to that. I like that quite a bit. And this is all just sculpted. This is not, extra geometry that's been modeled and placed on here. It's all just a result of sculpting these pieces. And you can get some really, really nice effects just from these very, very basic alphas. And of course, you can make your own alphas. I think this alpha is a little bit too much like a flower. It's a little too busy, so I'm not going to use that one. And let's go to some of our others here. And I wouldn't use the star, but this circle alpha is quite cool. So I don't want to overdo it with the circles, but I'd like to put a couple more little bits of greebly detail in here. So let's do one here. And that's not quite where I want it, so I'm going to undo that, Control Z, and then draw it again. Nope. See, the one thing about these is you have to get your aim just right on them. There we go. And let's go back to our light box, and let's grab some of the other planar. There's planar line cut, planar line thin. These, if I select this one, this actually uses a line. So you can plane along or bevel along an edge like this. So if I were to draw a line here, it would bevel along that line, but it is conforming to a line. So if I wanted to do something that was curved, I'd have to do the planar path, for example, double click that, and then I could follow a path like this, and that would plane along that path. Now I probably need to turn my draw size up to get that. There you go. It's not quite what I'm looking for. Let's draw it along here. There you go. So you can see that that's planing along that path, along that surface. So let's undo that and then redo it so you can see what's happening there. So let's undo, and I will just repeat that same stroke along here. There you go. I turn my draw size up and then replay that stroke, it will continue to plane those areas. Let's go to the light box again, to our planar brushes. There's planar spline and planar spline cut. Planar spline cut is an interesting one. If I were to run this along this area here, it's cutting sort of, it can be very, very aggressive, and it's not one that I use a whole lot, but it is, instead of respecting the curve, it's basically slicing it down. It's using this line there. So if I draw this, you see what that's doing. It's basically almost hammering it. It's taking this alpha and dragging it along that path. Going back to our light box, and there's the planar cut and planar cut shallow. Basically, all of these are built to work along compound curved surfaces, and these are really about flattening to a plane. So if I do planar line, I can plane things out like this using that line stroke. Like so, you see that it starts to really flatten things out, but I don't really want that. I don't want these to be faceted areas. I would much rather these maintain their sort of curvature. So let's go back to my trim dynamic brush. And you see the difference here with trim dynamic, and why I prefer trim dynamic to the planar brushes is that it allows me to create these machined industrial curved surfaces. They don't have to be organic exclusively. They can have that quality of like a car body or something like that. So let's go to our damn standard brush, and I want to carry this line, this panel line. I'm going to turn off my lazy mouse and go to stroke, turn my lazy mouse back on, but I'm going to turn off backtrack. There we go. Click, press and hold shift, let go, and that'll give me that nice panel line there, carrying on from this edge of this circle here. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll let that one go right down that way. And if I press Alt-1, it'll replay that stroke. So another neat thing that you can do with the planar brush, if I were to, let's say, find an area where I want to put perhaps an air vent, like here, on this piece right here. I'm just going to make sure that I've got the geometry to handle it and it doesn't look too terribly bad. Let's go ahead and divide this so we've got more geometry. I'm going to make sure there's no masking on here, and I'm going to divide a couple times. Now that's 8 million polygons for that particular area there. So let's turn off frame mode. And I am going to mask an area for a vent here. So I'm going to hold down the control key, go to my masking menu, and I'm going to do mask perfect circle. And I'm going to make sure it's square center. It is. Click, drag. Now I can press the space bar. I'm going to undo that. It's not quite where I wanted it. And I'm going to go back to the masking menu. And I'm going to do mask circle. And I'm going to set square. There we go. Now I can press the space bar and I can move this mask to about here. Just wanted to get it right there. And I will control click to invert my mask. Now I will go to B for brush, P for planar, select the planar brush. I'm going to set an alpha for the planar brush. So let's go to the alpha menu. Let's, in the alpha menu, select alpha 28. And let's go to modify, and let's take horizontal tiles and turn it all the way up. And that creates this grid, this sort of venting shape here. Take my stroke, make it drag rectangle, go back to our brush menu, and bring our depth down. Now watch this. If I click and drag, it's going to create venting there using that planar brush. Clear my mask, and there we go. I'm going to alt-click on my internal shape here, that under layer of helmet, and I'm just going to knock these shapes back here using the trim dynamic brush. I don't want those to be visible through there. There's a couple other areas where it's visible where I don't want them to be, so Looks like actually most of them have been sorted out. So I'm going to select this material. Solo. There we go. Hey, that looks pretty nice with the chrome. Let's go back to our reflect red. And I'm going to alt-click on this subtool here. Let's go into frame mode. Turn off the lines. There we go. And let's give this the droplet material. Oh no, then that won't have a nice contrast with the underlayer. So let's give it a different material. Let's do reflect orange. It'd be nice to have a little different bit of material representation here. So we'll go to material, color, fill object, and then switch back to our reflect red. So now we've got yellow, orange, and red happening here. By the way, whenever you're using your brushes, you can set your brushes to do material and alpha. So for example, if I fill this object, this section here, if I go ahead and go to material, color, fill object, so I filled that with the matte cap red shiny, reflect red. If I change now to a different material, let's say green metallic, and then I go back to my brush menu and select the planar rectangle. And I will go back to, it's very important to reset your alphas now. I'm going to go back to my alpha and take that H tiling and turn it down. So I've just got that circle. If I turn on material with my brush and then click and drag, this is going to add material as well as form. So this can be really, really handy when you're trying to create sort of complex and interesting shapes. So remember that you can assign materials along with your sculpture. So let's do one more piece here. I want to, let's say, create a connecting piece that runs down the front of the helmet here. I'm not happy with like this big empty shape. I want like kind of a shape that runs this way. So let's save our work. I haven't saved in a while. What I want to do is create a proxy object that combines the pieces that I'm going to be drawing across, as it were. So I am going to go to my subtool menu. Now my piece is going to go from this across the visor. So this piece is already at the bottom, so I'm going to duplicate that. I'm duplicating it because I'm going to make a proxy object, which I will later delete. I'm going to select the visor, and I will duplicate that. I want to send the visor to the bottom of the list, so I will just control click, or shift click, I mean to say, on that down arrow. And so now I've got my two copies here. Select the visor. There's no subdivision levels in the visor, and there's no subdivision levels, or there is a subdivision level on this piece. So I'm going to drop that down, delete higher, and I'm going to go to merge, merge down, and click OK. Now, solo this. This is just a proxy object. That's all this is, and it's just a surface upon which I'm going to use the either the topology brush or even mesh extraction. I just want to create a new piece of geometry here. So if I go to frame mode, turn off line, we've got multiple poly grouping here, and let's turn frame mode off. I think the easiest thing for me to do would be to do the topology brush. So I'm going to do B for brush, T for topology, and select the topology brush here. Turn my draw size up, and I'm just going to run a curve that runs right down the center of this, like this. And that's my center line. Now I'm going to turn my draw size down. It'll be a lot easier. I'm going to draw lines out from here. And I'm going to draw a line out from here. I want it to actually come all the way down to this point here. And I'm going to draw a line that connects those two. Alt-click and undo. So that's not reading as quads. So I'm going to draw a new line from here across, and there we go. It's starting to read as quads. I'm going to draw a line from here across, from here, from here. And here we go. You see we've got a little extra bit right there. I'll let ZBrush finish its quick save. That little extra dot's going to give us some trouble. So let's go ahead and Alt-click and drag across these to get rid of them. I'll draw a new center line. draw a new line coming out this way and a new face connecting that way. So there we go. Now we're getting our pieces here. I'm just going to carve out some extra faces here, and oops, that is not playing nice. So let's draw that again. And I'm going to draw a line from here all the way up, and hopefully we can carve a line right through there. And that's good. I'm going to Alt, click, and drag off the model, and that'll clear any hanging edges. Now, if I Alt click on the model, it will generate my geometry. So let's undo that and switch so the geometry is white. Alt click, and that's the resulting geometry. The thickness is determined by how big my brush size is. So if I turn my brush size up, if I undo this, turn my brush size up, and then Alt click, it makes it a thicker section there. So we'll stick with this. Now, the reason I made that proxy mesh is because I want to Control-Shift-Click on the piece that I just made. Now, it's got polygrouping on it for the thickness. So the easiest way to do this is when you generate this, it's going to mask everything but your new geometry. So Control-Click on the background to invert your masking, and simply go to Visibility, Hide Point, and that hides anything that's unmasked. And then simply go to Tool, Geometry, Modify Topology, Delete Hidden. So now I've got this piece that runs straight down the center that I can use to create some kind of an extra bit of sort of mech detail here. We'll bring this down. I've got my X symmetry turned on. Maybe I'll pull these out, and we'll bring this up so it's meeting this piece here. And let's press the D key. So we're getting a single dynamic subdivision level out of this. Let's bring this down. Control-Shift-Click. So we've hidden our other polygroup, and I'll pull that out. And there you go. That gives us a nice kind of scalloped forward shape there. So I will go into frame mode, turn my draw lines back on, and let's say I want to bevel my edges here. I will go to Geometry, Crease, Bevel Width. Hold down the Control key, click and drag, and I can bevel those edges interactively like this. Now, Shift-D turns off my dynamic subdivision levels. I want to make sure that my edges are pretty evenly spaced, so I'm going to go to B for Brush, Z for Z Modeler, select Z Modeler, mouse over one of these faces, press the space bar, and I'm going to select Equalize and all polygons. Click and drag, and it will equalize the surface area. Mouse over an edge here, and I'm going to insert, not inset this time, but insert single edge loop. There. And mouse over the face, and we'll equalize our polygons again, like so. There we go. Now, I am going to create a Boolean subtraction object here by going to B for brush, I for insert, IMM primitives. I'm going to select the cylinder insert, and I will go to brush, create, and select create nanomesh brush. Now, nanomesh brushes are just insert mesh brushes that function with the Z Modeler tools. If I press the space bar, you see it's set to insert nanomesh, and I'm going to set it to polygroup island. I will click and drag, and what that does is it draws out a single instance of whatever insert mesh I have selected there. So I will just drag out these cylinders like this. Now, if I go to the tool menu, nanomesh, here I can control things like the length or the height. I can adjust the Z offset, so I can set them deeper inside the surface here. So what I'll do is I'll just dial these down like that. And maybe I'll make them smaller. So we've got something along these lines here. And I definitely want the height to be longer. Let's turn on solo. I want to make sure that they're going all the way through. All right. Now, I can also tile these. So you'll notice that we have H tile and V tile. I could tile these 2 by 2. I could tile them 4 by 4. Now, that's sort of messing with the orientation. If that happens, it just means your faces aren't pointing the same direction. Go to Geometry, Modify Topology, and you have the option here to align edge. If I click that, it aligns all the edges to be going in the same direction, so your nanomeshes will actually be pointing in the correct direction. So let's go back to our nanomesh controls here. I'm going to close out of the alpha menu so I don't have quite so much open. So let's go back down to nanomesh, and let's take our tiling. Where did it go? We had tiling 2 by 4, 2 by 2, and we can turn up our size like this. And I'm going to turn my tiling down to 1 by 1. And that should be good. So why are we doing this? Well, I am going to go to the inventory menu here and click 1 to mesh. That converts those nanomeshes, which are essentially just instanced objects, into a new mesh with their own polygroup. Control-Shift-Click on them so I can hide them. B for brush, S for select, R for rectangle. There we go. Go to Subtool. With those pieces hidden, I will go to Split Hidden. Now I'm going to take this piece here, the front panel, and I'm going to put it into a new folder called Face Panel. And let's scroll down here. Let's turn off Solo so we've got all of our pieces visible again. I am going to turn on dynamic subdivision levels for that part and turn off frame mode. And let's give this a material. Let's change to the, let's say Matcap Gorilla. Nope, that blends too much with the faceplate. So let's change this to something else interesting. By the way, you can get a variety of different Matcap materials in the Pixelogic website. So this is a nice, no, I don't quite like that one. We're running out of cool materials. Say silver foil? Yeah, that one's nice. So I go to Material, Color, Fill Object. Now I'm going to grab these cylinders that we made, put that inside the same folder, and turn on Subtract. Then I will turn on Live Boolean, and that carves out those pieces. So it makes this sort of negative spaces here. But I'm not really happy with how these are intersecting, so I'm going to undo and go back up here. Let's undo. See if we can't. Nope, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get back to where we had our pieces. So let's turn off visibility on this guy here. And let's undo. There we go. There's our nanomesh again, so I can adjust it. So I'm going to go back to my nanomesh settings. These are interpenetrating each other. Don't like that, so I'm going to go to nanomesh. There we go. Undo into the point that it's an editable nanomesh again. And let's turn our size down. So they're making individual holes there. They're not going to kind of merge into one another. And make sure their height is tall enough that they're going all the way through. And then I will just click 1 to mesh. We can delete this old one. So let's just delete that one. Click OK. And Control-Shift-Click to isolate those pieces. And split hidden, and turn on our dynamic subdivision levels for the faceplate. Select these pieces and make them subtraction objects. And now you see that we can carve out these sort of negative spaces there on that helmet piece. So that completes this look at hard surface. We've covered a lot of ground and a lot of tools. And I've talked about a fair number of tools that we also cover in some other chapters as well, because like I said at the beginning, hard surface in ZBrush really refers to a suite of brushes and mesh operations and techniques that can be used to create hard surface geometry. With the exception of things like the planar brush proper, a lot of the brushes are not just explicitly only for hard surface, but they certainly lend themselves to creating hard surface objects. It's really a type of workflow and a way of approaching your model. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and you found these lessons helpful, and you can take this forward and start to explore things like panel loops, group loops, the planar brushes, the dynamic trim brushes in your own workflow and create hard surface costumes and props and mechs. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.